Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for a webcast on Yemen, 6 years since Operation Decisive Storm. What has been achieved? I'm Nick Harris, and I'm the Senior Analyst and Program Head for Authoritarianism here at the Newlines Institute for Strategy and Policy. This discussion is the first in a series of collaborative events and research on Yemen that will be done by the Newlines Institute and the Sana'a Center for Strategic Studies. Today, we'll be wrestling with the consequences of Operation Decisive Storm, trying to understand the motivation for the Houthis' push for ultimate power in Yemen, and thinking through ways that this horrible conflict can be stopped and the rebuilding of Yemen can begin. I'll be facilitating today's discussion featuring a truly expert panel of thinkers on Yemen, and I'd like to introduce you to them now. First, Ambassador Barbara Bodine is a distinguished professor in the practice of diplomacy and the director of the Institute for the Study of Diplomacy at Georgetown University. She had an over 30-year distinguished career in the State Department, where she worked on Yemen in many roles, most notably as the U.S. ambassador to Yemen from 1997 to 2001. Next, Abdul Ghani Al-Iryani is a senior researcher at the Sana'a Center, where he works on the peace process, conflict analysis, and the transformations of the Yemeni state. He has over 30 years' experience as a political and development consultant, including working on Yemen in senior roles at the UN and at the World Bank. And our third panelist, Mesa Shuja ad-Din, is a non-resident fellow at the Sana'a Center. Mesa is a widely published journalist and analyst on issues pertaining to Yemen. She is also the author of several deeply insightful studies on the Houthi movement, the Yemeni Zaidi community, and the potential future role that the Houthis will play in Yemen. Now, just as a reminder, members of our audience can ask a question using the Q&A chat window on Zoom. I will try to get to some audience questions later on in our discussion. Ambassador Bodine, Abdul Ghani, Mesa, thank you for joining us for today's discussion. So I'd like to start us off quickly by going over the state of the situation as it now stands in Yemen. Operation Decisive Storm has not achieved its objectives. This campaign, along with the actions of the Houthis, has significantly contributed to Yemen being the world's worst humanitarian disaster, as the UN calls it. The human catastrophe unfolding in Yemen is horrible beyond imagination. 150,000 to 200,000 Yemenis are estimated to have been killed so far. 4 million Yemenis are estimated to now be internally displaced people. 16 million Yemenis are going hungry, and 5 million live in near famine conditions. Further, the United Nations estimates 2.3 million Yemeni children are acutely malnourished. That's half of all Yemeni children under the age of 5. And worse, if their food needs are not met, more than 450,000 Yemeni children could die of starvation this year. Yemen also experienced one of the worst cholera outbreaks in modern history in 2019 and 2020, and it currently has a metastasizing COVID-19 crisis. Finally, there are credible estimates that if the war stopped today, it would take at least 20 years or more to return Yemen just to the fragile economic state it was in before the war began in 2015. The human insecurity in Yemen is very bad, and it's made worse by the regional dimensions of the war on the ground. Yemen is currently divided into several zones of control with various foreign actors, including Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Iran, exerting influence inside Yemen. As we speak today, the Houthis are advancing in the strategic Ma'rib province, one of the last strongholds of the Saudi-backed Yemeni government, led by President Abdurrabbu Mansour Hadi. The Houthis continue to fire missiles at Saudi infrastructure and to fly drones into Saudi Arabia from Yemen. So, with all these grim, dark facts on the ground laid out, I'd like to begin by focusing on the seemingly chaotic diplomatic push to finish this war. We've had both starts and stops in the UN-led process to end this conflict, and it often seems like it's been more stops than starts. But there have been some successes, such as the Stockholm Agreement in 2018, which has kept Yemen's most important port, Hodeidah, open for humanitarian assistance to enter the country. Ambassador Bodian, I'll turn to you first, then I'll ask Abdulghani and Mesa to weigh in on this question. Why has it been so hard to get diplomacy to work to end this war? And how can we build on some of the success of the Stockholm Agreement? Ambassador Bodian, you're muted.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. You would think that after a year of Zoom calls, we would all have the how to unmute yourself down pat, but technology keeps getting ahead of me. So anyway, thank you for the first cut on such a simple question as why hasn't the war stopped sooner? Civil wars, unfortunately, do tend to take a number of years to burn through. And this one, as you rightly pointed out, is not a simple civil war. It doesn't even have two sides within the domestic actors, but has been regionalized by the Saudis, the Emiratis, and the Iranians for their own agendas, which in many ways have very little to do with Yemen. And once you have external actors who do not pay the price of the war, it is not their citizens who are dying, it's not their infrastructure that's being destroyed. They are more comfortable with the war continuing and supporting their, I don't like the word proxy, but we'll use proxies, to encourage or at least not discourage their proxies from continuing the fight, because it is, except for the economics of it, it is no cost. You also have a major existential question going on within Yemen is what sort of state will it be? And even will it be one state? And those are the kinds of issues that will also drag on. A third part of it, I regret to say, but to be candid, is the United States, which is a close friend of both the Saudis and the Emiratis, and has been a close friend of Yemen, took a pass for the last 4 years in engaging or even actively supporting any kind of peace effort. The recent Saudi announcement last Monday is a result of both the UN Special Envoy Martin Griffith having kept at this and kept it going. You know, his tenacity is remarkable, but also some fundamental changes in the US with our new administration, and particularly their reassessment of our support for the Saudi part of this war. And that changed the topography significantly. We are not at the end, but perhaps we're at the beginning of the end.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Bodian. Abdulghani, would you like to comment on the diplomatic question?
I think that there is one other aspect to the political process, and that is the fact that there are certain obstacles in the way of a successful peace negotiation. And those obstacles have not been dealt with by neither by the UN Special Envoy nor by the parties. And that includes the war economy. There are people making lots of money out of that. Mm-hmm. And the calculus needs to be changed for these parties. They can't keep making all this money and be constructive in the peace process. Also, there's the issue of parties that can be spoilers that have not been invited to the peace negotiations. STC just gained by force its seat at the table, but there are other parties that are not, they still have to fight to reach the table. And then there's the issue of divisions within the government side and the, let's say, untoward agenda of the Saudis being in Mahra and threatening the integrity of Yemeni territory.
Thank you very much, Abdul Ghani. Mesaf, would you like to comment on the diplomatic issue?
Hi. I think the war started between two parties, and now it's becoming between different parties. Even the regional players are increasing throughout this war. It started between Saudis and Iranian, or somehow the militia supported by Iran, and Saudis and Emiratis from another side. Now, most of the Gulf states involved, except Kuwait, but all of them, they are involved in this war. And this war also influenced by the Gulf Rift, also between the conflict between the Qataris and the Saudis at some point. So I think from the beginning that the coalition launched this war on a very high expectations, misinformation, and they don't have even a local ally on the ground. So this take from them a long time even to take the southern territories and force the Houthis to withdraw from this area in Yemen. But still the expectation was high at the beginning. By the time the Houthis have become the strongest party, and now the imbalance of power, of military power, is a really big obstacle to reach any peace agreement.
Very much, all of you. I'd like to build on this point because you've all pointed out the fact that there have been serious regional effects of this conflict. When you have regional actors involved engaging with the multiplicity of Yemeni players that are participating in this conflict. So Abdul Ghani, I'd like to start with you. You've made some interesting points about the fact that fundamentally Saudi Arabia and the Houthis have an interest in coming to an agreement. Can the regional effects of this conflict allow that to happen? And is it enough to end this conflict for Saudi Arabia and the Houthis to come to an agreement?
An agreement between the Saudis and the Houthis is a prerequisite for successful negotiations, but that is not enough to make the negotiations succeed. So they can happen. And of course, the obstacle that stands in the way is the deep distrust between the parties. I think that the moderates and the Houthi leadership realize that the currency of Iran, which is military technology and training, is good for the wartime, but is not good for the peacetime. In peacetime, Yemen will need reconstruction, will need to pay salaries, will need to provide services, and clearly the Arab Gulf states, Saudi Arabia primarily, will cover these expenses. So any successful peace agreement requires an advanced understanding between the Houthis and the Saudis. And I think that there were signs of that during the Kuwait negotiations. Nicholas, you are muted.
Can you hear me now? Thank you very much, Abdul Ghani. Mesa, would you like to weigh in on this issue?
Yeah, about the regional aspect. I will say that it is easy to solve the problem between the Saudis and the Houthis. It is the easiest part, maybe. It's not very easy, but it is much easier than the local agreement. Sharing power and how we can share power, how we can make a kind of local governance, how we can decentralize the Yemeni state, it's very complicated. We have tens of militias on the ground, and all of them, they are afraid because the Houthis is much more stronger than them. It is the only militia that has a structure. It is very organized, and they are military-wise, they are the strongest. So the rest of the local social and the military powers, they are afraid from this kind of imbalanced power. And if the coalition withdraw, so they will be much weaker in front of the Houthis, so the Houthis can take their part or their share easily. And we have a bad experience in how the Houthis, they are not very committed to their agreements. The idea here that also the Houthis now, they are behaving as a ruler in their area, as the state, and they are applying their vision, their religious vision. For example, they change the education curriculum, they start to force their social code. They are doing many things that they are behaving as people who are going to behave as a state, not going to share power with others. And also the STC in the south, which is the strongest military power in south. It's not the only one, but it is the strongest, we can say. Also, if they are going to share with the Houthi, to share the power with the Houthis, that will make them in a big trouble in front of their supporters, because they are calling for separation in the south, and their supporters now, they are complaining that they are not firm enough with the government, with Hadi, who's closer than the Houthis. And they are not firm enough. They are not violent enough to force their power and to force de facto situation in the south and take their territories by force. So I think they will lose a lot of legitimacy in front of their supporters. And big part of this of the SCC is Salafi group. So there is another reason that doesn't make them unwilling to share power with the Houthis, or not enthusiastic to share power with the Houthis, because they are Salafis, so they have another reason. It's not also about the southern cause, it's about the ideological reason or the sectarian reason, which is that they are Salafis and they don't feel that they need to share power with Shia militia in the north, while they are demanding as an independent southern state, and they think that they can restore the southern state, which is, I have to say that the southern state it was 23 years between 1967 until 1990, and the age of the unity is 30 years. So they are calling for a state which is now, there is nothing from this state has remained on the ground, except what is the imagination of the people who believe in this. Before that, before 1967, South was different political entities, and now this is the situation in South. They are different entities, and the North also the same thing. So dividing Yemen is not the solution. Keeping Yemen united is not as an easy solution. So I think this is a really big problem, because when you talk about sharing power, sometimes we are making very easy, because I have to remind the people that Yemenis share power between 1990 until 1994, and this led to war in 1994. And then they share power from 2012 until 2014, and then they go to war, to civil war. So we have to be very cautious when you talk about sharing power. It's not that easy in Yemen.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. and Abou-Ghani. I appreciate that perspective from the ground. Ambassador Bodian, I'd like to ask you to react to what you've heard. Is it enough to get the ceasefire going between Saudi Arabia and the Houthis, and we can begin to get some of this reconstruction or development and rehabilitation aid in? And then as the situation improves, then you push to try to find the political end state? Or do you have to do all of this together or in a phased way to have it achieve success?
Yeah. Okay, I have to apologize. I'm having very bad internet problems. So, Nicholas, if I go out, just raise your hand or do something. I do agree with both of my colleagues here. First of all, a Saudi Houthi agreement is necessary, but sufficient. It is part of the war, and it's only between two of the multitude of parties. It leaves open questions of territories not under Houthi control. It even leaves open the question of what is going to be the long-term political status of the Houthi. Mesa made a excellent point about, where is the South in all of this? And particularly, I liked her comparison of how long PDRY was a separate state and how long the Republic of Yemen was a unified state. The SDC doesn't represent the South. And in fact, the South is a very hard entity to define. The old 1990 line was not even between the Zaidi and Shafi, north-south, because the Tayez Ib region, which is Shafi, was part of North Yemen. So it was an achingly artificial line. It also doesn't reflect the fact that under the British, Aden was a colony with all of, a crown colony with all that implies. But the rest of the protectorates were really not part of that political system. And so the Hadramaut, Mahra, all the others don't have either a sense of connection to Aden, or particularly under the People's Democratic Republic, they were treated extremely badly by the Marxists out of Aden. And so this idea that the STC represents something called the South, and Mesa has put it very well, it's a romanticized idea, not one really grounded in history. That is going to have to be addressed. Perhaps not in the full detail, but any real peace agreement can't be just it's going to have to address South, if you want East, centralize, or at least the concept of decentralization within a unified state, the principles, if not the details of the political structure, will have to be in the peace agreement and not simply a ceasefire in place, because that will not hold and it will not solve anything.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Bodin, for your reaction. And I think that builds well into a question that we have from one of the attendees that I think is really pertinent, because it talks about, in a sense, the near future and the potential midterm effects. And so the question from one of our attendees is, what does the future hold for President Hadi? To what extent does his continued leadership enable or obstruct reaching a peace settlement? What effect would his removal due to ill health or Saudi pressure or otherwise have on the conflict? Who'd like to take that up first?
I'll start, and then I'll let my Yemeni friends actually say something useful. So I'll get myself out of the way first. I don't think that Hadi the person is critical to a resolution of the conflict. He is named in resolution 2216, which is a complication. And he is, as the president did invite the Saudis to come in. And so there's a little bit of a legitimacy issue of the Saudi coalition, whatever is left of it, even being involved if Hadi himself is not there, since he is tagged. but my own personal feeling is that elements of his government and elements of those who have been some kind of neutral in this are definitely going to have to be there. Whether it is Hadi himself, and if it's ill health or wants to spend more time with his family, as they always say in Washington when they lose their job, that's irrelevant. I think one of the major differences that's important when you're looking at this is the Houthi can continue without Iranian support. The Hadi forces probably cannot survive without Saudi support. And that imbalance, I think we're already seeing. It said that it was contingent upon the agreement of the Houthi and the Hadi government. Everybody is talking about it, including us here, as a Saudi Houthi agreement. So I think we have to sort of take what is a legitimate government partner in peace talks, whether or not Hadi himself is there. Now, we do have another complication, is that, were Hadi to step down for whatever reason, his vice president, Ali Mohsen, is probably less acceptable as a negotiating partner than Hadi is. He has a history with the Houthis. He has a history and he has a history of his own. And so that is going to be how you finesse that side of the negotiation, who's at the table and what the terms are. That is going to be a very, very difficult piece to play. And I will now turn it over to my Yemeni colleagues to put some meat on that.
Thank you, Ambassador Bodin. I just think that's a really, really important point that you raise about Ali Mohsen. Is he even more toxic, so to speak, as a negotiator? But also the idea that the Houthis don't necessarily need Iran to succeed in their objectives. Hadi is very much dependent on Saudi Arabia. So I think those are two very important points that set the scene well. Abdul Ghani or Mesa?
I will go ahead. Lack of effective leadership on the part of the government has been one of the key obstacles to peace over the past 6 years. It's not just Hadi who is totally ineffective, but also the entire office of the presidency. I mean, the people and the structure are both unsuitable to a situation as we are in. The presidency, the leadership should be collective, where different parties are represented, and that allows voice for all stakeholders in the conflict. Hadi is, as much as Hadi is dependent on the Saudis are also dependent on Hadi. It is very much like the South Vietnamese president during the American intervention in Vietnam.
And you know how well that turned out.
Exactly. It's usually a toxic formula, and it's bound to lead to failure. The Saudis want to maintain the legitimacy of their intervention, and that's why they keep Hadi. But that is not going to lead to success, definitely. They could transfer legitimacy to a presidential council or to the parliament. There are many options that there's no time to discuss now. But Hadi's monopolization of legitimacy has really been a serious obstacle to peace in Yemen.
Yeah.
We don't hear you.
We
don't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Mesa, did you want to make a comment on what Ambassador Bodine?
I don't have a lot to add, but I have to say something about the legitimate government, or what's called the legitimate government. The real power inside this government is Islah Party, actually. But Hadi, as a person, if the Saudis decided to abandon him, he doesn't have any power, actually. And he's worth, he doesn't worth anything. He's not Ali Abdullah Saleh. Ali Abdullah Saleh was a charismatic, was a leader. So even if when he leaves the power, he remain a strong and an important person inside the political game in Yemen. But Hadi, he's not like that. Hadi created, what created him is the chair. And if you remove this chair, Hadi doesn't worth anything, actually. So, but the only important player in this umbrella, which is called the government, the legitimate government, it is the Brotherhood Islah Party. And the problem that Ali Mohsen also has a strong connection with Islah Party, and the enemies of Islah Party is a lot now, regionally and locally. Locally Houthis, STC, and regionally UAE, and the Saudis doesn't trust them anymore as it was before. But they are still important power inside Yemen. They are controlling Taiz, and they have some influence in Marib. And most of what is called the National Army, which is affiliated the government, it is from the Brotherhood, or it is dominating by them.
It's an important point that I have come up in this discussion. The question of agency, how much agency do the local Yemeni actors have in terms of not only determining sort of their next moves in this conflict, but their interactions with their potential foreign patrons? If we were to get a ceasefire, let's say it happened today or tomorrow, and the Houthis and the Saudi Arabia have come to an agreement, we still have, as has been raised, the STC. We have all the multiple actors in the south, as well as this question of what happens with Hadi. Is there a first step that you could see emerge in terms of the local Yemeni actors exerting their agency to try to act independently of their foreign patrons? Or is the situation in Yemen so far gone in terms of the humanitarian crisis, as well as the need to rebuild, that what we're looking at is a need to have all the regional players aligned to get some progress?
Who do you want to go first on that one?
I'd like to give.
Do you want me to?
I'd like to say, actually,
let's give this to Mesa first.
Yeah, give it to Mesa. Mesa, I'd like to hear your thoughts, because that speaks to the sort of the end state, sort of how you get to an end state.
Yeah.
I'm not optimistic on the local level, actually. There is a kind of imbalance power in the local level, and we have a lot of players now, and as I said, it is very difficult to share power. If we talk about local governance, we need a central state in Sana'a, and Sana'a is dominating by the Houthis, and even the Houthis, I don't know if they want to share power, even if they are the dominating player, and how the Southrons can justify the situation to their people. So I'm not very optimistic on this level. I believe the regional level is easier to deal with, especially that the Houthis, I think, as Abdelghani Ariani clarified, that they need the money from the Saudis, and they will face a big challenge if there is a peace in Yemen and the war stop. Now the war acquit them from doing anything. They are just collecting taxes from the people for reason or no reason, and in return, they didn't provide salaries, they didn't provide any kind of services, and they claim that because of the war, we can't do that. But after the war ends, they will face peace challenges, and this militia is fighting we are talking about 17 years Yeah. They are fighting since 2004 until now. They didn't stop fight. And most of them, they start the core of Houthi militia. They start fighting since they were children, teenager. So for them, fighting is the normal situation. And they can deal with fighting. They can deal with war, and they used to deal with this. But what about peace? They don't have any vision, I believe that. They don't know even what are the people needs during the peace. So they will face a huge challenge if this war stops now. And I think now they are overconfident because they are very strong military-wise, but they may lose a big part of their confidence if they face the challenges of peace and if they face the society without the Brexit of the war, without claiming that this war is the reason that we are not providing this and that. And this is what I can say. Thank you.
Yeah.
Abdulghani, would you like to make a comment on that?
Yes. The end state. I think that Houthis are very good at fighting, and that makes them look very, very big. The end of the shooting will finally reveal the true size of the Houthis, which I think is not totally exaggerated because of conflict. The Houthis as a movement are composed of a core ideological militant Zaydis who would like to continue fighting because it's jihad. And then they allied themselves with the Sana'a-based political elite that used to work for President Saleh. And these are moderates who know a thing or two about state building, about running a state at least. And I think we don't hear the voice of that very large block of the Houthis who are moderate because we are in a state of war. As soon as fighting stops, they will raise their voices and the movement will moderate. But still, they are in control of Sana'a, and there's no way let's say the framework that was discussed in 2216, UN Resolution 2216, or in Kuwait negotiations of bringing the government back to Sana'a is possible at this time. I think we need to think outside of that box and think of a highly decentralized system that is kept together by a loose central state.
Yeah.
Could I build on that point? Because the idea of a decentralized system, for some, could lead towards the separation of Yemen. It could lead to independent regions. And one prominent example, though we have dissected how strong the STC is, would be southern independence, as well as there have been other movements, such as the Tihama movement, for example, that has desired to have more autonomy in Yemen. And we had this interesting discussion before about sort of the historical models of how does this geographic space that's Yemen actually, how's it been governed historically? And so I want to build off this point you made, Abdulghani, because I think this is interesting. If one of the best possible models we can have is some sort of decentralized system where everyone still is connected to a common Yemeni concept of a nation, is there a place where you could implement that first? And can you do that if the Houthis continue to have a military campaign that seems to seek to subordinate all the other regions under its control or influence?
Let me start by casting a little bit of a light on the history of Yemeni statehood. Yemen has a history of 3,000 years of statehood. 2,940 of them were highly decentralized, federated model. And each state of those, each dynasty, such as the Salahids, the Rasulids, etc., lasted for hundreds of years or tens of years. And then we had the attempt at a highly centralized state in the 60s in the south and in the north, and they didn't last very long. Both models were failure. And then we had the model of the unified Yemen, also centralized, and it failed as well. So clearly Yemen is more appropriate. The more appropriate model of state control is highly decentralized. And I'd like to point out that decentralization is what destroyed Yemen, not the lack of it. Right now, we don't have a central state, and we are still held together by the concept of the Yemeni state.
Ambassador Bodian, would you like to build on?
Yeah, I agree that Yemen has never, I mean, it has gone through models of centralized government, but it has not gone through successful models of centralized government. The nature of Yemen, the topography, and all demand a level of decentralization. But I agree with a comment that Mesa made earlier that you still will need a unitary state with a central government that, even if it is, just taking on the basic requirements of a state, who does the foreign policy, who deals with the donors, who projects Yemen to the world and who deals with the world coming into Yemen. You need some kind of education policy, some kind of a health policy. So you need that umbrella, but then you need decentralization and in the implementation. One thing you don't want to back into is something
It seems that your sound has frozen.
Don't listen to you.
Is going to, I'm okay.
It paused for about 5 1,000ths of a second right there, just as you were talking about
okay.
decentralization.
Okay. Well, whatever that point was, it was irrelevant. It's going to have a central hub, if you like, but it's going to have spokes that go out to the governance. And then, to take my metaphor one step further, it's going to need a wheel rim to hold the spokes into the hub. And that would be the idea of a Yemeni state. There is a sense of being a Yemeni. You can still be a Hadrami, a Mahri, a Tihami, whatever. You can have your clan affiliation, your tribal affiliation. We all have multiple identities. But if there is this idea of a Yemeni state that is not under Saudi Arabia, is not under, is sovereign and accepted and legitimate. And then you have the question of how do you implement a decentralization which allows the regions to have a sense of agency over what happens, but it also recognizes that there are limits on bureaucratic capacity and it varies considerably. So how do you manage that? Totally centralized, never going to happen. Totally fragmented, a prescription for utter failure. And so this hub, spokes, and wheel rim idea is what's going to have to be negotiated. To kind of go back to your earlier question about the agency of other players and how this works, because I think it's part of it. If the STC, I think the STC is dependent on the Emirates, but they will obviously go their own way. They declared unilateral independence and then it fell flat because nobody joined it. But they need the Emirates to kind of back them but the Emirates also need to push the STC to be part of this decentralized unitary state. So the external players both push and pull their respective
Ambassador Bodian, looks as if
Decentralization, not demand an autonomy, which is not sustainable and not really feasible.
Thank you, Ambassador Bodian. Actually, I wanted to ask Mesa, because you've done a lot of work looking at the Houthi movement and how it interacts, this sort of wheel and spoke model that Ambassador Bodian has outlined for us. With the current mindset of the Houthis, what would need to happen for the Houthis to be able to accept it? Can they accept that? Or are they really trying to dominate Yemen, projecting power from the north, projecting power that way?
They have a core who believe that they are the only legitimate ruler for Yemen. And until now, for example, when you read the speech of Abdel Malik al-Houthi yesterday, when you hear the statements of the Houthi spokesman, Mohammed Abdel Salam, and other, even their official discourse, they talk about this war as if it is a war between the Yemeni party, which is the only Houthis, and the Saudis. And they never recognize the other local parties, and they don't consider them even, they even exist. If they consider anyone, or if they consider or recognize any local player, they will talk about the STC, not the legitimate government. And when they talk about the SCC, even they talk about them as mercenaries. So they are the only people who represent the Yemeni party. They are the only legitimate people. So I think they believe, they have that belief, religious, and also they relied on their historical legacy in Imama, that they are the only legitimate people for Yemen. But in the short time, the Houthis, they may show a kind of pragmatism. They may be pragmatic for a while, but until when? This is the question. But they could be pragmatic if they found some incentive, some motivation, or something tempting them to do this thing. But they have a core, an ideological core, who always do pressure on them, that don't recognize anyone, and they believe that they aren't the only right one, the only Yemeni one, the only Muslim even party in Yemen. It is the Houthis. And we can't underestimate the importance of this core. But they have other people who may try to be pragmatic more and more practical, and they may reach to some peace agreement, but I don't think they can last for long. They have a big military wing. They have a very big military wing now. They are becoming very strong, very influential during this war, and they are very radical. And I'm not sure what they are going to do with this wing if the war stops.
Well, this is a very important point because,
Can you raise your voice, Nicholas? Yeah.
This is a very important point because, Abdul Ghani, I know you have referred to the fact that the Houthis may have won this conflict in the past, but if they don't have the sense that they have won enough, then this conflict could continue, or the conditions to have a sustainable peace could continue. So that sort of leads me to my last sort of major overarching question, which is that if we're looking at an opportunity to get a diplomatic breakthrough between Saudi Arabia and the Houthis that could end this conflict in the near to midterm, but the underlying conditions of the conflict, which is the local actors do not believe, especially the Houthis do not believe that they have won. Is there anything that the international community can do to get the Houthis to realize the gravity of the situation? And then building on that, what type of policy options should the US have towards the conflict, towards the Houthis, and then towards a sustainable peace in Yemen that it can realistically enact? I know that's two big questions, but I think I'd like to end the discussion on them.
Right. Let me start by saying that the Saudis have gotten too much of a good thing from the international community, and that was self-defeating. UN Security Council Resolution 2216 sanctioned the Houthis and made it necessary for them to adapt to a very harsh climate of international climate, and then that made them stronger, and the international community lost all leverage on them. And on the other hand, the government, the internationally recognized government, became reliant on international support and became lax and weak. So they defeated themselves basically by being too relaxed and too corrupt. And the Saudis have also got themselves in a bad spot by isolating the Houthis and forcing them to become this military power that it is now. International influence, international leverage could be sustained by having the UN take a neutral position between the two parties, make it let's say attractive for the Houthis to engage the international community. And that cannot be done by isolating them. What we need to stop the war is to change the calculus of the warring parties. So people want those who could not defeat the Houthis in the battleground want to defeat them in the international arena, and that's not going to happen. It's just a pipe dream. We need to bring the Houthis into this process, and they need to see something. They need to see some value for them in stopping the war. And I realize that they will never understand, they'll never accept the model of government that is the only model that can emerge out of this conflict, which is a highly decentralized system where they don't control everyone. They cannot control the entire country. Basically, it will have to be, all factions will have to be autonomous in the context of a loose, decentralized state where the central state is more of a regulator than an executive, and allow the governorates to run their own affairs. But I think through negotiation, it could be made palatable to the Houthis because they'll control areas, significant part of North Yemen. And maybe when the war stops, then the moderate voices in the Houthi movement will rise and it will become easier to talk to them.
Thank you, Abdul Ghani. Is that Ambassador Bodine, would you want to take this question on? Can you hear me?
No, we don't hear you.
Okay, you can hear me now.
Yes.
Okay. Would either of you like to take this question on?
What is the question? We don't hear you.
The question being, if the Houthi are not incentive, if the Houthi believe
Let me just expand, and then we'll get.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we are hearing
Okay.
you.
So the question being, what can the international community or the United States do to put enough pressure on the Houthi and other warring actors to come to an agreement? And if the Houthi, based on the fact that in this discussion we've said that the Houthi, they have a lot of incentives to continue the conflict, and Messiah, you brought up the point that they ultimately believe that they can dominate Yemen. Mm-hmm. So what are the policy options to get them to stop?
Yeah. I think it's going to be difficult. Every peace agreement is, that's a self-evident fact, sorry. It's going to take outside actors being able to talk to the Houthi and make it clear to them that, particularly from the U.S., that, we have signaled, for example, we took the Houthi off the terrorism list immediately. we seek humanitarian assistance in Houthi-controlled areas, that we would stop supporting Saudi offensive operations in Yemen, and that we were even reviewing our arms sales to Saudi Arabia. That should have signaled to the Houthi that this is the time for them to reciprocate. And the fact that the Saudi peace plan of last Monday included opening Sana'a airport, facilitating trade through Hodeidah, this joint reserve that would pay civil servants, as well as the ceasefire. Those were not just Houthi demands, those are actually the demands of the international community in order to get humanitarian assistance and get money flowing again. There has to be someone, I don't know if it's the Iranians, if it's the Omanis, if it's somebody else, who goes to the Houthi leadership and says, you have gotten basically what you're going to get. You might be able to take Marib. You may have the ability to take this war further, but you basically have gotten what you want. And you are not going to get a better deal than what is on the table. And if you don't accept this ceasefire, the other elements, and you will be in perpetual war. Now, I agree with Mesa and Abdul Ghani that there is a Houthi radical military wing, which is going to be perfectly fine with continuing the fight. The question is, are there enough moderates who will listen to outside guidance that you have a deal on the table to get started, and it is in your political interest to take to move into the Houthi. We know that Martin Griffith talks to the Houthi. We know the Omanis talk to the Houthi, and we presume that the Iranians talk to the Houthi. Everyone is now talking. Political wing to be able to override the military long enough to take this thing forward. If not, then we are where we were several months ago when there was no prospect of peace. And at that point, it's going to be very much on the Houthi for having prolonged the war, not defending Yemen, but having prolonged the war when there was an opportunity to start to unwind it, not the final agreement, but at least begin the unwinding. So it shifts the responsibility to the Houthi. You will now become the aggressor, not the defender.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Bodian. Mesa, I would like to give you the last word as someone who studies the Houthi very closely. If you were brought to the Oval Office and were going to give President Biden a game plan for engaging the Houthi and getting this conflict to end, what would it be?
Yeah, it is a very difficult. I would say that the Iranian has an influence on the Houthis. We have to admit that. And it's very difficult to separate the file of Yemeni war from the Iranian file. And I will not exaggerate the Iranian influence, but throughout this war, I think their influence on the Houthis has become bigger and bigger. Also, the Omanis, they provide for the Houthis a lot of logistic, and they provide for them a good space that they can move to. And now it is a base for some leaders, Houthi leaders, so they can meet the people there. So I think those two countries, they have some leverage on the Houthis, so they can do some pressure on them. If you want a kind of pressure, and because we need to motivate them to engage any peace process, because they are very strong, overconfident, and they feel that the war the time is not on the side of the Saudis, but it is on the side of the Houthis, actually.
Thank you very much, all three of you, Ambassador Bodian, Abdul Ghani, and Mesa, for what has been a rich detailed, nuanced discussion on Yemen. Let us all hope that the year ahead is better for Yemen than the years that have followed, that have preceded it. And let us hope for a better future for the people of Yemen who deserve it. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you, all of you, for joining us on this discussion. You can follow this video on our YouTube, Newlines Institute YouTube channel, and please follow us on Twitter. Thank you.
Thank you.